pretty excited about this presentation. It's very different than the way we normally do it here at HealthCot. It's not a straight science talk. So on purpose, we're trying to portray or give a wide swath of experience from patients who have taken the herb all the way through growers who are growing the herb to benchtop scientists, to people that have experience using it in the community, to naturopathic doctors using it, and from a Western perspective. And so the idea with all of this is to kind of paint the picture of the use of this plant from a both scientific perspective all the way to a personal perspective as well. So that's kind of the hope and expectation today. Like I said, it's new for us. We're normally pretty straight sciencey folks, and so we'd love some feedback. Let us know how this goes, and if this is something you'd like to see more of. We are very much becoming into Artemisia annua and afra. We've got a few research studies going on here at HealthCot. One of which is a systematic review on Artemisia annua, or Artemisia in general, for fibrosis, and that's part of the Energy Grant, which is putting on this seminar series. And the Energy Grant is a grant from the National Institute of Digestive Disease and Kidney Disease. It's a mouthful, NIDDK. And that's to develop training and do systematic reviews in this larger space. And so that's how we got here today, essentially. So I think what we're going to do is, so Sylvia and James are both here, but we weren't 100% sure about internet connection, so we recorded their talk ahead of time. So do you guys still want me to play the recordings, or did you want to try to go live?
No, I'm fine with the recording.
Fine with okay, perfect. And Sylvia,
I am fine. I am fine with the recording, I think. And I just want to mention I'm at work, so at any time I might have to pop out for a few minutes because, after school is going to start pretty soon. So
you got it.
Okay. All right.
Absolutely perfect. And so what I was thinking is, so we've got 5 speakers. So I'm going to shut up really soon because we've got a lot of speakers. And the thought is these are going to be punchy 15, 20-minute presentations. We're going to kind of go back to back. If you have questions, put them in the chat and hold on to them. And what I would ask is if the speakers who presented could keep an eye on the chat. And if they see a question that they feel like they can answer in the chat stream, great. If they want to save it to the end, awesome. We're going to save some time at the end for Q&A, but that way at least people can get some questions answered throughout. So that's the idea. Okay, so I'm going to start with sharing Sylvia's story. I'd like to start with people's personal experience using it, and let's see here. Hello, everybody. At this point, we'd like to introduce you to Sylvia. Sylvia is going to share her lived experience as a patient taking Artemisia annua, and sort of share with us what that means to her and what her experience was like as part of a way to talk holistically about this plant, going from scientists to clinicians to patients to growers and everything in between. So welcome, Sylvia, and yeah, we'd love for you to share your experience if you would.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for inviting me to this, and it is a pleasure to share my experience. My experience came really, it wasn't, my use of Artemisia wasn't planned for at least for diabetes. It just happened that I was taking it for COVID, because James had given me the capsules to take for the immune system and to help with COVID. And I took them, and then I stopped taking them. And later on, I decided to take them just as a supplement. And at the time, I was taking medication for my type 2 diabetes. And I started noticing that my glucose kept going lower and lower. And so I decided to stop taking the medication, and I just continue with the Artemisia. And then I just continued doing that. I even stopped going to my physician. I didn't like him anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. But I continued to monitor my glucose, and it's been, fine. And then my tests that I've had have been, normal and or nearly normal. And so I told my current doctor that what I was doing, and he said continue doing it. And he was interested in how I was managing my diabetes, and that's how I started taking it and continue taking it. And I have always been, my whole life, I was born in Guatemala, and I grew up in Guatemala, and then I came to this country when I was like 13 years old, and went back and forth for many years. But I grew up with the cook in my house was an indigenous woman, and so were my nannies. And they always gave us, when we were sick, they always gave us some kind of potion. And even sometimes I don't think my mother knew what they were giving us. So I always had that belief in that that when you're taking something natural, you're closer to nature, and that there is a relationship with what you take and the earth. So I that's been my experience my whole life. And so I've always toyed with the idea of taking supplements or doing herbal remedies, just because that's how I grew up. Although I had, my vaccines and had my tonsils out and adenoids at age 7, like every other child, and that was growing up with me at the time. And so I don't know what else to tell you, but that's it was really a surprise, because it wasn't planned. It just happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating. And I just love the story you tell of, growing up as a child with this connection to herbs and herbal medicine and potions, as you say, and to sort of come full circle and find it useful for your health now, I think is pretty amazing. And yeah, so just thank you for sharing that and sharing your experience. And, throughout the rest of this conference or seminar, we'll be covering the different nuanced aspects of it, but we just wanted to really make sure we set the stage with what it felt like from someone who was actually using it as a patient. So thank you so much for your time today.
Gosh, there's something else that I do want to mention.
Please.
I went on a trip, on a vacation for like 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to take the capsules, and I didn't take my glucose every day. I did not. I did not follow a diet. I ate and drank whatever, and when I came back, and I took my glucose reading, I thought it was going to be off the charts, but it wasn't. It was like 120, and and that was after 2 weeks of not taking it. And in a couple of days, went down to about 105. So I guess I didn't have to take it every day. It was still in my system. So I thought that was really interesting. And sometimes after that, what I've done is like I don't take it like for a night or so, and then next morning it'll be a little elevated, and then when I take it again, it gets back to the normal limits. I mean, it's not elevated a lot, maybe 4 or 5 points.
Interesting. Yeah, we've chatted about this as sort of these natural challenge elimination rechallenge episodes as further, interesting data points for this when you're trying something as an individual. So that's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you again for your time.
You're welcome.
I want to introduce you to James Kishlar, who really introduced me to Artemisia annua and afra, and I think is a wonderful advocate for these plants and all the things that they can do. And so without further ado, James, I'd love for you to kind of give us a sense of who you are and how you got interested in this, and yeah, take it from there.
Well, thank you, Josh. I wanted to thank you and Dr. Withers, Samuel, and Anna, and Sylvia for a chance to provide an awareness of the attributes of Artemisia annua and Artemisia afra. The kind of story that I would like to say is the why, the how, and the expectations of Artemisia annua and Artemisia afra from a gardener's point of view. I like to think of it as a gardening since we feel very personally attached to the daily experience. So how I got started with this was with the Maison d'Artemisia, an NGO based in Paris, with Artemisia nurseries located in 23 African countries. My wife and I were introduced to Dr. Lucille Cornet, who's the founder of La Maison d'Artemisia, and became aware of their mission, that being to develop and support local Artemisia nurseries as an anti-malaria source by addressing the needs to provide local bottom-up rather than top-down resources. And as of today, their collective 130 Artemisia houses are across 28 countries with 8 million treatments since their creation in 2013. In October, this October, La Maison d'Artemisia, in conjunction with the ISHS, the International Society for Horticultural Science, will be conducting their first symposium on Artemisia, one health plant in Arusha, Tanzania. And from La Maison d'Artemisia web, they reported there has been over 5,120 publications on Artemisia, 300 universities conducting research on Artemisia, and 80 countries represented by researchers of Artemisia. Plus the knowledge of Artemisia within Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine for centuries started to open my eyes with interest. So one of my previous experiences was that of the founder of a Haitian NGO addressing reforestation pre and post the Haitian earthquake. This allowed me to witness the resourcefulness of a long heritage of herbalists in Haiti. I learned to appreciate the bottom-up solution, that being providing local solutions for their medical needs, rather than depending upon top-down medical donations, etc. For when those medical supplies end, locals needed to rely upon their awareness and regional and local botanicals to survive. Thus, when I became aware of La Maison d'Artemisia's work, I got hooked, and I wanted to find a means to translate that here in the United States. Via La Maison d'Artemisia, I was able to contact Dr. Pamela Weathers at WPI to see how best our LLC could help with their Artemisia research. As it turned out, we discussed the interest in cultivating Pam's Artemisia cultivar, Sam, that's the cultivar's name, here in the semi-tropics, to see if that variety could tolerate our climatic conditions. Also to be able to demonstrate quality assurances for potential clinical study and commercial applications. So how is it done? Qualitative assurances are the key to having consistent results, particularly when dealing with botanicals. For not all Artemisia annua and Artemisia afra species are the same. Our logo from our Artemisia R&D nursery to your hand is to denote that we propagate, harvest, and manufacture both Artemisia annua and Artemisia afra at our own facilities. And in addition, we have FDA GMP certifications for our manufacturing and have third-party labs to analyze for pesticides, microbials, filth, etc., as well as periodic analysis for benchmark artemisinin and total flavonoids. From a Artemisia annua quality assurance perspective, our goal is to maintain a certain high level of artemisinin and total flavonoids, and with Artemisia afra, high levels of total flavonoids. However, we're aware that there are considerable compounds via Dr. Withers' research that one believes work synergistically as well. We also have registered our Artemisia annua and Artemisia afra samples for DNA sourcing with the Fairchild Botanical Garden and the International Center for Tropical Botany here in Miami. Many associate Artemisia with the name wormwood. However, that's a generic name. And very important to understand that Artemisia annua is an annual and Artemisia afra is a perennial. Artemisia annua has artemisinin, Artemisia afra doesn't. Artemisia annua is photoperiod sensitive and Artemisia afra isn't. Besides the medical qualities of the plant, they both have anti-pesticide properties, so we have no bug issues. That's really important in the semi-tropics. At our facility in Homestead, Florida, we have no soil. It's literally situated on a layer of coral limestone. So for propagation, we have raised beds and raised pots, where we are using now a peat moss base with perlite soil material. The average soil pH is 7.3 to 7.5. We assure adequate lighting for photoperiod times. We have overhead LED lamps, and watering is via overhead sprinklers with well water. To assure consistent propagation, we clone all crops. Our original mother, Artemisia annua plants were provided from Dr. Withers' WPI lab, as mentioned, so that we could see how the variety SAM would acclimate to our semi-tropical conditions. Artemisia afra samples were provided from Mason to Artemisia. Clones are started in 4-inch deep cloning trays with a commercial peat moss mix pro-mix, and then transferred to pots and raised beds, also containing pro-mix. Presently, we are fertilizing with the 2020 time-release pellets. On the side, however, we are also in talks with FIU, Florida International University, to conduct a small test plot with full growing term clone to harvest with Artemisia annua utilizing vermicompost and vermi-tea solutions to see if we can get the same consistent results. Studies have indicated that with Artemisia annua, the highest levels of artemisinin and total flavonoids occur just before flowering. We don't want the plant to bud. We have to watch closely in anticipation and harvest just before. This varies between 7 to 9 months from clone to harvest. At this stage, plants are typically 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. So there's a lot of stems to contend with that we mulch. We are now interested to see if we can harvest plants around the 6-month period and still get consistent artemisinin and total flavonoids level. The fresh harvested leaves are then transported to our processing facility about 10 minutes away, where they're washed, spun dried, and placed within a dehydrator for further drying. That takes about 48 hours. These whole dry leaves are then filtered with screens to remove excess stems and airtight bags for storage. For capsules, we pulverize the whole dried leaves and use pull-in capsules. I think I'm pronouncing that properly, since they are vegan, non-glutinous, and creates a strong, flexible film that protects contents from moisture and oxygen. We try and combine 20 pounds of pulverized whole dried leaf into a super batch for marketing. Bottling and shipping are done in-house. Presently, our products we market online are Artemisia. It's a 100% dried whole leaf Artemisia annua, Artepet, which is 100% dried leaf Artemisia annua, but at a lower dosage, and Artecreme, a Artemisia afra-based cream, a topical cream. Our expectations, antibiotic resistance is without doubt one of the greatest issues in today's drug scene. Pharma and other researchers are looking into overlooked compounds for new applications. However, and I'm still of the belief that the synergy of botanicals have even more potential than isolating individual drug compounds. Artemisia annua has shown efficacy with antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antiparasitic, and metabolic disorders. We have lots of anecdotal stories from our clients that specifically include schizomyelitis, diabetes type 2, Lyme disease, osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, wound healing without fibrosis, and eczema relief. On a personal note, I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis in both hands. Osteoarthritis is not curable, but to relieve the pain is the objective. I went through cortisone shots, but the pain continued until I started taking our Artemisia capsule. I've been taking daily dosage for over 3 years now with no pain. Our osteopath has recommended Artemisia to her osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis patients, as well as being a client of her own for her own anti-inflammatory conditions. Besides the anti-inflammatory pain relief, I believe that taking daily doses of Artemisia annua for the past 3 years indicates an advantage that Artemisia may have for long-term treatment safety. Hopefully, the medical profession can consider future therapies to include Artemisia annua, Artemisia afra, either solo or within combined antibiotic therapies. I find it interesting the whole holistic approach to healing that the naturopathic community is practicing, and plan to try to contribute via further clinical reports and studies. Through that work, hopefully the results can be transferred to the likes of La Maison d'Artemisia's community as well. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. And I have a few follow-up questions. This is great. And for context to our listeners, so we're now doing some of that research together, which is how we got to know each other. And we're in the middle of a clinical trial now on using Artemisia for SIBO. We're in the middle of a systematic review on fibrosis. We're in the middle of a case report as well for diabetes, and hopefully lots of other fun research over the years. So quick follow-up questions. One, how were you already a grower? Like, were you already growing plants and then found out about like the medicinal benefits of these plants and brought them to the States? Like, how did you have this all set up? Was this all built for Artemisia annua and afra?
I'm an architect by trade.
That's what I thought. So how did this happen?
And that's how I got to projects in Haiti. And that's a whole nother kind of story. For the reforestation projects in Haiti, I got interested in botanicals, and I'm a grower at our home, and I love it's just part of my DNA. But so I started a native tree nursery in Homestead to kind of supplement what was going on in Haiti, as well as just getting involved with down here. So I had the property, but I didn't have the facilities that I've had to build. We built it's just an acre and a quarter, but we had to build all the infrastructures to accommodate what we thought we could do with Artemisia annua. And it's a completely different set of conditions. Overhead lighting has to be made, and so those were the things we had to do. So I had a little bit of that to get started with, and it just kind of snowballed into the rest.
Wonderful. Oh, just fabulous. Well, I want to thank you for your presentation today, and we'll be hearing from lots of other speakers on this plant in just a moment. Okay, so let's cross our fingers. Dr. Peterson, do you want to try that again?
Well, hello, everyone. My name's Anna Peterson. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I lead our botanical medicine program here at National University of Natural Medicine. And I'm really excited to be here today to give an herbalist perspective on Artemisia annua. And it's already been very exciting to hear Sylvia and James's perspectives as well. I'd just like to start, with a little additional background to what James gave us on the plant, botany and ecology. Of course, this plant is in the Asteraceae family in the genus Artemisia. And this Artemisia is a really large genus. There's many, many species in it. And we find some related action in those species. Some of the species that are really commonly used in herbal medicine from the Western Materia Medica are things like Artemisia absinthium or wormwood, Artemisia vulgaris, that's mugwort, and even Artemisia tridentata, which is a native to North America, which we call sagebrush. So we see that there are Artemisia species around the world, and different cultures have used them, sometimes in very similar ways, which is kind of exciting. For Artemisia annua, as James told us, we use the aerial parts, generally harvested before flowering. This plant is native to the temperate regions of Asia, but it's also found in some subtropical regions now, and it's naturalized in Europe, Africa, North America. It's something that that traveled with people. And we find that with some medicinal plants that people found them to be very useful, especially for certain conditions, and they brought them with them and they traded them. And so, so plants move around the world in that way. Artemisia annua loves the sun. It also thrives in disturbed areas. So we find it a lot along riverbanks and roadsides and edges of forests and open fields. It tolerates a wide range of soil conditions, generally preferring well-drained soil, moderate nutrient content in the wild. It's a tough plant. It's really adaptable to a wide range of conditions, and that's why we see it able to grow in a really broad region of the world. As far as the ethnobotany goes, the first documented uses of Artemisia annua are in China, and this is where the plant is native and plentiful. It was a plant that was included in the ancient Chinese text, the Shenong Bankao Jing, which is called the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica. And this was documented around 200 CE, but we know that this is a compilation of oral history, so the use of this plant goes back thousands of years. It was valued for the treatment of febrile illnesses and other conditions involving excess heat. It's also used for digestive complaints. The use that spread through Asia, along the Silk Road, into Europe, along colonial trade routes, into Africa, and now it's embedded in some of the folk medicine traditions of people outside of China and in other parts of the world. As an herbalist, I really like to emphasize the organoleptic profile of the plant. Organoleptics are, it's the art of using our senses to explore a plant. And we use organoleptics in evaluation of identity and quality of a plant, but we also use it to tell us something about the medicinal use. So there are a couple taste sensations and smell sensations that tell us something about Artemisia annua. And many of the Artemisia share these qualities. One is bitterness. So the sesquiterpene lactones are really strong bitter constituents in this plant. And if you taste the Artemisia, the bitterness comes through. And like I said, this is many Artemisia species. And we see that Artemisias are used as digestive bitters around the world, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Bitter is not just a flavor in herbal medicine. It's a whole medicinal action that stimulates secretions and motility and helps regulate digestion. Another important part of this plant is its aromatic profile. It has a sweet, herby, camphoraceous, sometimes described as medicinal smell to it, you know, resinous qualities, some earthy qualities, and even some citrus-like qualities. So the essential oil has many different species that make it up, chemical constituents, I should say, that make it up, and it gives it a really complex aroma. Artemisia annua is one of its common names is sweet Annie or sweet wormwood, and that speaks to not all the Artemisia species have a sweetness to their aroma, but Artemisia annua does have a bit of sweetness that comes in with its medicinal and camphoraceous odors. Major constituents, camphor, 1,8 cineol, which is sometimes called eucalyptol, Artemisia ketone, germacrine D. So multiple aromatic constituents in this plant. Many more than just the 4 listed, but those are ones commonly researched and brought forth just because they're in larger quantities. There's also some mild astringency that we taste, and that's due to the flavonoid and phenolic acid content in the plant. From a traditional medicine perspective, of course, traditional medicine doesn't care anything about individual constituents, right, and chemistry. It comes from the standpoint of what we taste, what we smell, what we experience in the plant, and then what we observe medicinally. I have a glare. So that's why the organoleptics are really important. It's like this is how people, before bench science was a thing at all, right? This is how people defined and investigated and experimented with plants, was starting with the organoleptics and then watching for clinical effects. Circling back to the traditional use in Chinese medicine, there's a couple fun things that I just wanted to bring forth. It's called Qinghao in Chinese medicine, and Qing means green, fresh, and youthful. It corresponds to the wood element, the springtime, the impetus to bring forth fresh new life. And with regard to Artemisia, this is a description that speaks to its green nature and also some of its cooling effects. Hao refers to the Artemisia genus. This is a large category of aromatic herbs, and the term encompasses the qualities of clearing and purging, which have something to do with both the strong bitterness and the aroma of the plant. The medicinal actions described in Chinese medicine are that it helps clear summer heat. And this is sometimes not a pathological fever, but this is heat that rises in the body, described as excess of yang energy and imbalance in fluids in the body, causing excess heat. Also used in febrile illnesses to clear fevers, to cool the blood and stop bleeding, and of course, check malarial disorders. It's quite famous in Chinese medicine and now throughout the world for the treatment of malaria. And malaria is a disease that is that has a very high fever, and that can be quite dangerous. So it's important to recognize in Chinese medicine that the descriptions oftentimes are not based on a pathology. They're based on an energetic effect of the herb, like clearing heat, cooling, dispersing, those sorts of things, which is very valid. It's different than an allopathic mindset and description that says, oh, I use it for a disease. But it's important to, as an herbalist, to hold these energetic descriptions because it allows us to expand upon the various uses of the plant. And we'll go through a few more of those things. From a Western herbal medicine perspective, we really take a lot from the historical use in Chinese medicine. And however, we've expanded on some of those uses or expanded on the description of those uses to come at it just from the way that the Western mind may think differently, or a Western paradigm may describe things differently. So we see that we recognize it as a diaphoretic febrifuge herb. So promotes sweating, clears fever. We recognize Artemisia annua for its really broad spectrum antimicrobial activity, for its anti-inflammatory activity, immune modulating activity, as a bitter digestive stimulant, and also something that has been investigated for its anti-cancer properties. I'm going to skip along and just touch on each of these areas. As far as antimicrobial effects, and this is something that James tipped us off about, is we have not just antimalarial effects in Artemisia annua. We have a wide range of antimicrobial effects, including antibacterial effects, antiviral effects, antiparasitic, antiprotozoal effects. So we need to not just be limited. Of course, there's been lots of study on Artemisia annua as a source of artemisinin, which has been developed into a refined constituent and applied in malarial illness. Of course, the history of the whole herb was in the treatment of malaria as well, and that's what tipped off all of that scientific study. So, but we need to expand from there, not just malaria, not just plasmodium. There's a wide range of activity. And not only antimicrobial activities or direct antimicrobial activity, but also antibiofilm activity and effects on decreasing resistance mechanisms like efflux pumps and so forth. So a really wide range of antimicrobial activity. And its many constituents. This is another really important thing that I'm just going to emphasize over and over again, is that it's not just one constituent in these plants. It's a whole range of constituents. And in herbal medicine, we really emphasize this, that whole plant medicine, like James also told us in his talk, was that it's there's a real power to utilizing the synergistic effects of all of the constituents within the plant, that we will see different and oftentimes more robust effects than when we refine and isolate a constituent alone. So there is real elegance and wisdom in using whole plant medicines. Highlighting of effects on fever. Of course, Artemisia is known to be very cooling. In herbal medicine, we say that the flavor associated with a cooling effect is bitterness. And so the bitterness imparts some cooling effect, and also the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory effects of this plant contribute to its cooling nature. There's also a diaphoretic effect, which means promotes sweating, which helps break a fever and then cool the body. And the constituents that contribute most to this are the volatile constituents, or the essential oils. Sometimes I use those terms all interchangeably: volatile constituents, essential oils, aromatic constituents. They all mean the same thing. And these increase peripheral circulation and help you break a sweat. There's, again, a real wide array of antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and immunomodulatory effects of this plant. And it's not from just one constituent group. Again, it's many overlapping antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and immunomodulatory effects of all the constituents. So we have the flavonoids contributing a lot of free radical scavenging, and even inhibition of NF-kappa B activation and COX-2 inhibition. The coumarins, which are part of the volatile constituents, they contribute both antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects that are listed there. The phenolic acids, things like chlorogenic acid, caffeic acid, these also contribute free radical scavenging and anti-inflammatory effects. The sesquiterpenes, the artemisinins, there's a whole group of them. They are known to trigger the NRF2 pathway, also have shown some inhibition of NF-kappa B and modulation of other pathways that downregulate inflammation. And the aromatics, or essential oils, also have antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. So we get this overlapping of antioxidant and anti-inflammatory and immune modulatory effects that produce the total anti-inflammatory effect. So this is where we make sense of the use of this plant in things like osteoarthritis, and even in conditions, metabolic conditions like diabetes. Not only might it affect your blood sugar, but also affects the pro-inflammatory effects of diabetes are benefited by it. Departing a little bit from inflammation, I just wanted to call out the digestive effects. Most of the Artemisia species are used in digestive disorders. Some because of their antimicrobial effects. So in things like SIBO, where we've got overgrowth of bacteria in the intestines, or even in infectious diseases, enteritis and so forth, but also just in dyspepsia, where we've got disordered, uncomfortable digestion. The Artemisias are used a lot, and Artemisia annua is certainly applied in this way. Its bitterness helps stimulate secretions and motility in the GI. And there's also this theory in herbal medicine that utilizing bitters stimulates vagal tone, because digestion is a parasympathetic activity in the body, that when we reinforce digestion through stimulation of secretions, stimulation of motility, those are parasympathetic actions, that we also increase vagal tone. There's just a little bit of research out there that is starting to look at things like this. Like, if you apply some of these herbs that are very bitter, do we see other effects of increased vagal tone, like effects on heart rate variability? So I'm excited to see if this herbal theory that herbalists have, held on to for the last few centuries actually turns out to be that we can actually corroborate that with modern science. We also see some carminative action as far as digestive action in Artemisia annua, and that comes from the aromatic constituents. So carminative action is something that helps decrease gas and bloating and cramping or discomfort in digestion. So there's a synergistic action between bitter and carminative actions in this plant. And lastly, not that it's the last effect of Artemisia annua, but in this brief presentation, I wanted to call out the anti-cancer effects of Artemisia. This is an area of study that, that we see growing. And we have effects, again, of multiple constituents like the sesquiterpene lactones, artemisinins, the flavonoids, the coumarins, the essential oils, and again, just like our antimicrobial effects and our anti-inflammatory effects, there's a sum total of effects of multiple constituents that provide a wide array of anti-cancer effects from this plant. So conclusions. We want to think about the plant, its environment, what can we learn from the plant as it grows. This is an important concept in herbalism. Artemisia annua is tough. It's adaptable. It's a sun-loving plant. Due to its toughness and adaptability and ability to grow in a wide range of climates, it has spread throughout the world and found its way into medicinal use in many different cultures. Of course, we recognize the earliest use of Artemisia annua in Chinese medicine, and it's also very interesting that we've pulled forth that use. It's actually still quite relevant to the use today. And then in the Western herbal materia medica, we use it in febrile illnesses. We also use it as a broad spectrum antimicrobial agent, as an anti-inflammatory agent, immune modulating agent. And I just want to emphasize that that it's the whole plant that has the largest magnitude of effect. And we see in many plants that have certain constituents that have been refined into pharmaceutical agents, sometimes that information just overwhelms our knowledge of the plant. And we have to go back to whole plant medicine and recognize that there's actually, like I said, a real elegance and wisdom in utilizing the plant in the way that it is sort of, the way that it grows, the way that it occurs in nature. That's a unique package that all add up to the medicinal benefit of the plant. And then there's inevitably much, much more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson. That was excellent. And if people have questions, hopefully, and I see that Dr. Weathers and James are answering in the chat as well. So if you have questions during the talk, please put them in the chat. Our expert speakers will try to answer, and then we'll have time at the end too. Just a quick note before the next speaker, I'll talk about cancer properties. I was meeting with someone else on this energy grant yesterday for a different project that we're doing. And he's like, oh, I heard about this Artemisia talk you're giving. Unfortunately, I can't make it. I'm like, oh, I had no idea you did this work. He's in the middle of a clinical trial and using it for cancer. And it's just the most fascinating thing. So I feel like we're going to keep on doing research here because apparently everyone I know in the world is obsessed with this plant. Okay, so moving on to the next wonderful presenter, Dr. Weathers, who is, I believe, the nation's foremost expert in this plant and the scientific study of this plant. And following her will be her PhD student, Sam. So I'm really looking forward to this. If you have any technical scientific questions, she's going to be our expert to try to handle some of that. So without further ado, Dr. Weathers, let me pass it off to you.
Can we, am I sharing or you
You're
want
not
me to
sharing
share?
yet. We can hear you though, but we're not seeing your screen yet.
Okay. Now you should be getting it. Yeah. You see it now?
Looks like yes. So we're seeing your view of it. If you want to press
Yeah, I'm
present.
trying to, there we go. Yeah. All right.
Yep,
I'm going
perfect.
to
Okay, thank you.
minimize things so I can also see the whole screen, so I can point things out. Oh, this always drives me nuts trying to figure out what to do. Okay. Thanks very much, Josh, for inviting me to speak on this, because obviously I'm obsessed with this plant and have been studying it for 35, 40 years now, but only in the whole plant perspective, maybe for the last 15 years. And so that's when I think it got very exciting for me. Before, it was more fundamental and it wasn't particularly practical for developing a therapeutic for people, especially who were suffering in low income and middle countries from devastating diseases. So whole plant makes a lot more sense. So this picture here is me next to a plant grown on a farm locally in Massachusetts. So you can see the size of this plant. This is the clone that James grows down in Florida, and I grow here. We grow it in the soil as opposed to in pots. So it gives you an idea. I'm 5'6", so that's a big plant. All right. So just a little background on the plant and Artemisia afra, because we're going to talk a little bit about both here, because I want to talk about how we're seeing some very interesting evidence against tuberculosis. And well, I'll mention some other diseases, but that'll be the focus of what I'm going to talk about with today's discussion. So obviously you've already heard it contains artemisinin, and you've heard this background. It's great background. We just learned about the ethnobotanical information. But there's also Artemisia afra, and afra is a perennial, as James mentioned. However, it's native to southern Africa. It doesn't have anywhere near the intense documentation like we see in the Chinese Materia Medica over, 2 millennia. Nevertheless, it has been proven to show very high efficacy against a lot of diseases, including malaria, but it contains no artemisinin, which really makes it very, very interesting. Both plants are very non-toxic, and they have long ethnobotanical histories of safe medicinal use. But for annuids, there's a lot more documentation than for afra. So just as a summary, these are many of the diseases that are apparently susceptible to artemisinin and or artemisia. And I have the artemisia plant ones in red, so you can see where work has been done. That's also many of the diseases. Some of those are ones we've worked on. For example, tuberculosis, SARS, COVID-19, and a little bit on Lyme disease. We just got funded to do an animal study on using Artemisia against Lyme disease here in Massachusetts, which is Lyme disease is rampant here. And we did a little bit of work on lung cancer. And so those are all published. I'm happy to share any of that information if anybody wishes to see it further. There's also some of these diseases that are what I call chronic diseases, and you can see examples here, and diabetes is the case we just heard about. So moving on, tuberculosis, let's talk about that. So tuberculosis is actually, I was surprised because I'd worked on malaria for a while there. I was surprised that this was a bigger killer than malaria. And it's worst in the developing world. It requires a multi-drug regimen for 5 to 9 months. So anybody who works in the clinic knows how hard it is to get patients to take drugs for that period of time, like impossible. But it's also very drug-resistant disease that is emerging. And the hardest part of the disease to treat, we all know about coughing and transfer, but the hardest part is that when tuberculosis starts to develop in the lung, it gets to this granuloma stage. And in the granuloma stage, the bug hides within the granuloma. And as a result, it grows very slowly, and it's only released upon coughing and breaking of the granuloma. And then the disease, reinfects other areas of the lung, et cetera, and other people as you're, exposed to someone. So that granuloma area is one of the things I'm going to focus on here. We've done other parts of study, but I just thought I would share with you because that's hard to treat. That is an area where it buries itself in these cells, and there's not a lot of oxygen that gets to those bacteria now. So they live in a different environment. And so it's very difficult to treat it with drugs. It's also difficult to study. So we're going to show you a little bit of what we've learned. So our question was, does Artemisia kill the hypoxic granuloma stage? So remember, that's a low oxygen stage. So you have to grow these guys up in culture. You add the extracts, you incubate, and all of this is done in a little serum bottle where you pull the oxygen out, and then, you hope you can let it grow for a while, and then you culture it on plates, and you have to wait for up to 14 days to get enough colonies to count on the agar plates. And so it's a very tedious, long set of experiments. And I am not a tuberculosis person. I'm a plant person, but I collaborate with all these people. So I collaborated with Scarlett Shell in our department, who is a TB expert. So here is the DCM just stands for dichloromethane. That was the extract we used. And indeed, after 7 days, we saw that both afra and annua were able to kill the granuloma stage in these, what we consider the granuloma stage because it's got no oxygen present, okay? And so that was very exciting. Right now, these are not, by the way, virulent strains because we do not have the safety procedures or facilities to do highly virulent tuberculosis. So this is like a disarmed tuberculosis, but this is important information that let us know that this is very possibly why we can view this as a much broader treatment. So what I wanted to show you next is there was an effort to look at what might be the active components in the plant, because we all know about artemisinin, but I just showed you data that shows that Artemisia afra, having no artemisinin, is also effective. So we focused on afra, so we could eliminate artemisinin as a confounding effect. And we did RNA-seq, biochemometric analysis, and all the yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to show you all that because there's a lot of real technical stuff, and I wanted to keep it simple here. But we did minimal inhibitory concentrations of all these organic fractions that we collected. And these here in the pink and blue showed the most activity. And so from those, we chose one that looked like it was a single peak, which meant maybe one compound instead of multiple ones. So it makes it easier to look at on a chemical view. And that was done by Josh Kellogg at Penn State, because he's the chemist. I am not. And here we can see aerobic growth. We have this, it's called HAB9, and it was inhibiting both aerobic and hypoxic MTB tuberculosis, the strain we were looking at. So you can see here's HAB9 here in aerobic growth. And then if you look over here in C in the hypoxic growth, then you can see that we saw that we didn't even get any growth. So HAB9 was effective. So what is HAB9? But we first wanted to know how did it compare to rifampicin, which is one of the drugs used? And you have to use a lot more of HAB9 to kill off tuberculosis. So it isn't as potent as rifampicin, but we're getting resistance to rifampicin. And rifampicin is also a really nasty drug. And isoniazid, INH, doesn't have a lot of effect on the hypoxic stage which rifampicin does. So that was the other thing that we were curious about, So when Josh, not we, but Josh, further analyzed, this is another Josh, different Josh, analyzed that compound and discerned its structure, it was a flavonoid. And so we found that it's actually present in both Artemisia species, and it might help explain why both of them showed some activity. So that's just an example of some of the work that we've done in this case. And so we then did some toxicity testing. And I had an undergraduate student, Trevor Bush, test it in brine shrimp, and we could see what hot water infusions, the DCM extract, what were their IC50. So we saw a little bit of toxicity, but that was an aquatic aquatic organism system. And here, these are liver cells, and we saw that it was also a little bit toxic there. However, neither plant is toxic to humans, and that's really well established. And it has a very high LD50s of grams per kilogram in animals, rodents, rats. So you don't do that study in humans, but you do them in rodents. And so we also know in humans, they can take these plants for long periods of time, and there is no toxicity, no significant adverse effects. So what about humans? So there was a preliminary study by a colleague, Dr. Dottie in the Congo, and he was giving small amounts or amounts of afra and annua versus TB patients in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he did that daily. They were 10 gram per liter tea infusions, and you divide it, you make the tea. The way this is done, at least in Africa, is you make the tea, and then you make that 1 liter in the morning, and then you dole it out in 3 aliquots throughout the day. And after basically 2 weeks, they could not detect any real clinical symptoms anyway from these. And it appeared that, as you can see in the data here, which the blue is afra, afra was working faster and harder than, better than Artemisia annua. So that was interesting in the fact that his patients remained TB-free after 2 months. Again, no adverse effects. Another study by Dr. Bajir in 2022 showed some radiology of a patient at 0 and 30 days. And I'm no radiologist, so I had to really look up and see what is this supposed to look like here. But this is a pretty dense area in the lung, and it's definitely depleted. And this was a combination that they did where they were using the WHO tablets here as prescribed over a period of time, and also Artemisia annua, Artemisia afra infusion. So that was also further evidence that there is, efficacy. And there were negative sputum smears also, where they saw organisms on day 0 and none on day 30. And not the greatest images they posted, but this is where you can see there are bacteria here, these little lines. Those are the bacilli. And there doesn't seem to be any in here. I wish it was at the same color comparison, but this is what they published. So overall, just to conclude, afra and annua, they seem more potent than artemisinin against tuberculosis, although artemisinin has some effect. Both of them killed MTB fairly equally under hypoxia. And I didn't show any data, but we also know that the tea infusions work. And that was certainly what was used in these African clinical trials, because that matches the cultural mores of treatment in those countries. We have at least one in multiple molecules that have been identified that have been in testing, although we haven't been able to get any more funding from NIH because all they want to know is, what have you isolated as a pure molecule and is effective? They're not interested in the combination, which is unfortunate. The toxicity in vitro seems borderline, but in terms of whole plant safety, they're very safe. So we're not worried about toxicity because those are cells in culture, mammalian cells in culture or brine shrimp. And there's more testing going on, and it looks in humans like there's some efficacy. So I just wanted to give you an example of the kind of work that's been going on in terms of looking at some of these. And so here's an acknowledgement just to let you know all the parts and people that are involved. So this cluster of people up here are from WPI. Josh and his folks at Penn State did the chemistry. Bushra was here for a year, and she helped do some of the work on the hypoxia. Rob Abramovich actually could do some animal studies, but we have no funding for that because he actually has a BSL-3 facility where he can infect animals with virulent tuberculosis and test these drugs. But we haven't been able to do that because we don't have any money for it. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know, and happy to answer questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Weathers. That was absolutely fascinating.
There was one initial, very first question about dosing that we didn't get answered because I think James has and the speaker
Got it.
has to.
Daily dose that we have on our label is 3 caps a day, which comes to about a little over 1 gram. However, and that's what I'm taking for my osteoarthritis pain relief for 3 years. However, when we have clients who tell us about more intensive pain and more interesting treatments, we suggest 9 caps a day, incrementally grow it, three for a couple of days, 6 for a couple of days, and then up to 9 for 2 weeks, and to see how that's being assimilated. We can reduce after that if they feel comfortable. I know that the SIBO study that we're doing with you all is up to 15 caps a day, which brings it to about 5 grams a day. We think that might be the limit at this, because when they're doing the tea infusions, they're using 5 grams in a 1 liter of water for that treatment. So we just kind of are playing. We don't have any analytical data on any of this. It's all anecdotal.
Gotcha. And then it looks like Sam's talk is up. I just want to give Sylvia a chance if you wanted to weigh in on yours. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me now,
Yes.
Josh?
Yep. You're good now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Well, I started taking like 4 capsules of the Artemisia. James, I think, can tell you how many milligrams they are. Started taking 4 and sometimes 5. And lately I've just been taking like 3 every day.
Great. Thank you.
So.
Okay. Sam, do you want to, it looks like you got it sorted. Go for it.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to apologize for like the technical glitch. So today, my name is Samuel, and I'm going to be talking about Artemisia's use for managing the malaria burden in Africa, and I'm going to be, specifically speaking about the evidence from Nigeria. I'd like to start by talking about malaria, right? So malaria, as we know, is like the leading cause of illness and death in Africa. According to the World Health Organization, 95% of the malaria cases in the world is actually in Africa, right? And Nigeria accounts for about 31% of the malaria burden in Africa. Now, Nigeria, we are about 230 million people in Nigeria. And just to put things into perspective, over 60 million cases, right, of malaria is reported yearly, and approximately 200 deaths annually. So from the map I have here, you can see that people who reside mostly like in the middle belt to the northern region of Nigeria actually have higher cases or prevalence of malaria. And this is due to like the climatic condition in the country. Now with malaria, I want to talk a little bit about like malaria transmission, for example, and we know that the primary vector for the transmission of malaria is the female Anopheles mosquito. And the female Anopheles mosquito, when it has like or is infected, once it takes a blood meal, right, it releases sporocytes, which through the bloodstream they transfer to the liver of the person, and this matures into merozoites in the liver. Now, this particular form of Plasmodium can actually stay latent for a longer period of time, and it's why someone like me who is no longer in Nigeria can also like from time to time show clinical symptoms of malaria. Now, merozytes can actually be released and it affect red blood cells, and it goes through like an asexual reproductive cycle where it gets into the ring form, like gets to trophocytes and the gematocytes, which also like gets malaria that takes blood meal and eventually carries and transferred to another person. Now, with the malaria burden in Nigeria, there's a lot of risk factors, right, for malaria in Nigeria, and a lot of which is categorized into like the environmental factors, biological, and behavioral. For example, the warm climate, like in Nigeria, allows for the smooth development or the breeding, rather, of the Anopheles mosquito. Also, socioeconomic status, poverty is rife in the country. There's poor housing, and not many people are like adhering or have access to like insecticide treated nets that which are like strategies for helping to combat the menace of malaria in the country. Also, biologically, children are actually more at risk, as well as pregnant women and immunocompromised individuals. According to the WHO, also, every minute, a child less than 5 years old actually dies from malaria. So it's a pretty intense ailment. Now, for diagnosis in Nigeria, obviously the rapid diagnostic tests, the RDTs, are what is mostly used because it's cheap and it's affordable. But there are cases where microscopy is also used, following like requests from like clinicians as well as the polymerase chain reaction. So currently, the drug choice for treating malaria in Nigeria is actually a combination therapy, and which is like a combination of artemether, which is a derivative of artemisinin, right, which is a key compound from Artemisia annua, the plant we are talking about today. Also, they come in different like brand name, like the Coartem or the Leonard, which I currently have still here. Also, artemisinin is being used in some cases. They also have cases where chloroquine is also being recommended. But the problem with the current drug choice for treating malaria is high cost. Like earlier talked about, there are a lot of people who live less than $1, sadly, a day, and they can't actually afford most of these modern drugs. Also, there is limited access with the cost and the issue with fake and substandard drug in the country and poor adherence. And with poor adherence, there's also like contributing to the menace of anti-malaria drug resistance. Now, like many other countries, right, Nigerians also heavily rely on herbal medication for the treatment of different kind of ailments. Here, I have a map showing the different regions of the world and their, reliance to herbal medicine. You can see that countries in middle to low income countries heavily rely on herbal medication for a variety of reasons. One, because of its accessibility. People can grow these plants or maybe just go into the wild and get the plant and use. Also, Westerners, for example, you can see North America are increasingly becoming interested, like many of us here today, in herbal medication because we already have like 20 to 40% of people showing interest in herbal medicine. Well, wherever any other person who is interested in herbal medicine is situated or located in, rather, when they get these plants, they actually like maybe use them, brew them into teas, incorporate them into soups like the one I consumed back home, or apply them directly to wounds to address a variety of ailments. Now here, these are the different kinds of malaria like drugs that can be used or plant-based therapeutics specifically. We have the neem, we have like the dogoyaro. This is virtually in every other person's home in Nigeria. We have Morinda lucida, and we also have like Moringa itself. But like herbal medicine, like we have with some other conventional drugs as well, the issue of scientific validation and dosing standardization is a problem. And there's also like potential, right, with standardizing and regulating the use of herbal medication in Nigeria, which is what some of our scientists have been proposing in the Nigerian Congress for the standardization and regulation of the use of herbal medication. Now, we're talking about the main plant of today, which is Artemisia annua, right? Like already talked about with the previous speakers, Artemisia annua is actually indigenous to Southeast Asia. It is not indigenous to Nigeria or even Africa. The one that is indigenous to southern part of Africa is the other species, which is Artemisia afra. And like we know, the key compound in Artemisia annua is the artemisinin, which is the anti-malaria drug compound. Now, we know that from artemisinin, other derivative, in trying to help with the bioavailability and in general, the pharmacokinetic properties of this compound, artemether has been made, artesunate, and even dihydroartemisinin, which is like a liver metabolite of artesunate. And like we know currently, there's no associated liver toxicity with the consumption of Artemisia annua, but these plants possess anti-malaria, anti-inflammatory, as well as microbial and medicinal properties, like has already been mentioned. Now, what is currently known about Artemisia annua use in Nigeria? The thing is, not a lot of people actually are keen, especially with locals, right, that rely on herbal medicine, are keen into the use of Artemisia annua yet because it's not like an indigenous plant. But people who like are in higher ed are already looking into the pharmaceutical potential of this plant, especially as the usage is already been popular in East Africa and Southern Africa. For example, this is one study that was conducted at Kano State University, which is in the northern part of Nigeria, and they did this project in collaboration with scientists at the National Biotechnology Development Agency in Nigeria, where they tried to look at both the cultivation. They also did like a phytochemical analysis as well as the in vitro antiplasmodial activity of the Artemisia annua plant they cultivated in Kano State. So what they did first was, after the cultivation of this plant, they got the seed from the Bioresource Development Group in Nigeria. This was like my former workplace. And they did some physical properties of both the hexane and aqueous extracts that they made. So they were able to see that for the hexane extract, they had like dark green. For the aqueous extract, it was dark brown. The texture was about, it was still gummy. I'm not exactly sure what they were trying to say as what their percentage yield was. It was confusing because I thought maybe probably they were looking at the artemisinin content of the plant of the both extracts. And this is some like the criticism I have with this work they did. However, they also looked at some of the phytochemical constituents of the aqueous and hexane extract of A. annua. And interestingly, for some of the phytochemicals that they assayed for, they saw that a majority of them were still retained in the aqueous extract and not in the hexane extract, which sort of kind of is good news for me because a lot of people who actually use herbal medication, locals, they don't look for any fancy solvents to actually, make this. So it's okay that with the usage of just like maybe probably water, that you can get all of the phytochemicals. Also, they tried to look at in vitro antiplasmodial activity of both the hexane and aqueous extract, and they used a popular drug, which is like the Leonat, which is a combination therapy having artemether and lumefantrine as a positive control. So what they did was that they assayed for the antiplasmodial activity, and as you can see, compared to the positive control, we can see that the aqueous extract was performing very well when used at 10 milligram per mil as the concentration. But even though the hexane extract wasn't doing as well, right, it still has some, measurable like activity. So the pictures I have here are pictures from their nursery beds as well as the farms where they try to cultivate Artemisia annua. Even though it looks scanty, and it makes sense because Kano is like the Sahel region of Nigeria. It's like a desert region, and that is probably may answer for why the picture currently looks like this. Also, some interesting work that was done somewhere in the southwestern part of Nigeria is the development of what they refer to as value-added tea bags and capsules of Artemisia annua. And here, they actually worked with a cultivar called the Anamed, which is the A3, because as we know, not all of the cultivars can actually thrive in Africa. So this one was specifically made to thrive in Africa. So from what we have here, these people did a lot of work with trying to like dry the plant, pulverize it, bag them in like put them in tea bags and also like make them into capsules. So they got the seed actually from Kenya because a lot of work with Artemisia annua happens in East Africa. So what they did was to transport it to Kwara State in Ilorin, and they were able to show that these plants can actually thrive in Ilorin. And it's a good thing because it's already like corroborating some of the work that the herbalist already talked about the plant being a very soft plant and can survive in different areas. So a lot of the work that went into this was the soil sterilization. They were able to the plant germinated and they transplanted, and they harvested 4 months at budding stage. So the processing involved solar drying, pulverization, as well as packaging. Now, the only problem I have here is with their dosing. Now, with the dosing, they talked about having the tea bags at 2.5 gram and the capsules at 500 microgram powdered leaves each. And the problem is they didn't actually, do some experiment to look at the artemisinin content, because we know that depending on the areas where these plants are cultivated, the artemisinin and in fact the entire phytochemical components of the plants can vary, right? So it would have been important for us to know the artemisinin content of the plant. But it's a good thing, however, that they are showing that not only can this plant be cultivated in Nigeria, there's already work ongoing with having to bag them and put them into capsules and, trying to educate the local populace about the pharmaceutical potential of this plant, especially with regards to clearing parasitemia. So far from what they did, they saw that A3 can be successfully cultivated in Nigeria. They also saw that they can also make standardized tea bags and capsules as well. So in conclusion, malaria, like we know, is still like a health crisis in Nigeria, and the Ministry of Health in Nigeria is doing everything possible in trying to contain this menace of malaria. Also, a high percentage of people in Nigeria also rely on herbal medication. Even though they're not actively consuming A annua now, we know that A annua is currently being, pushed into the market, being cultivated, and Artemisia annua is being grown. From information I saw from the website from the Ministry of Health, the actual loans that are given provided for farmers to help with the development of like Artemisia annua in general. So this is all I have for now, and I can take questions as necessary.
Wonderful. That was a fabulous presentation. I think, first of all, I just want to open it up for questions for everybody, but I just want to thank all the speakers, and feel free to send some love in the chat there. This was exceeded my expectations. This is the first time we've ever done this type of presentation that wasn't straight science and kind of went from patient to public health to global health to science to using it as medicine. I mean, it's just personally, selfishly, I just thought it was so fascinating, and I'm so jazzed about this model. But I'm very curious for feedback. Feel free to email us later if that worked for you as well. And I think it really spoke to the strengths of all the speakers here and this community that is being built. So incredible presentations across the board. Thank you everyone to our speakers. And let's open up to questions. Are there any questions from the audience or questions that were in the chat that didn't get answered? Feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead. We've got loads of time.
So I have a question for Samuel. When I think of treating malaria, Cryptolepis is the first botanical that leaps to mind rather than Artemisia. And so I'm curious why you're focusing on Artemisia. Is Cryptolepis not growing well in Nigeria? Are there compliance issues? Why the focus on Artemisia?
Like, oh, sorry. So we are currently looking into like the cultivation of like Artemisia annua, because we know like its pharmaceutical potential, especially with regards to helping with its anti-plasmodial activity. Now, for herbal medicine in Nigeria, cryptolosis isn't necessarily, because I'm not sure it is in it's grown in Africa, but the ones that are actually indigenous to us is like the neem plant and moringa, for example. And these are like the first plants that people would always usually go to get from like their farms or from the wild to use to address malaria, right? Especially the locals who cannot afford modern medicine. And so I'm not really sure if any other person does any work currently with cryptolopuses. Maybe they do, but from what I know, it's actually the neem plant or dogoyaro. I don't know if that answers your question.
I also just did a quick look because I had a question about that particular plant's toxicity, and I think it's much more toxic and there are concerns, especially on reproductive toxicity. Compared to Artemisia annua, I don't know about afra in terms of reproductive toxicity, but from the standpoint of general safety, both Artemisia species and annua in particular has been so well researched and used for so long that's why I think you see the focus on these two plants.
I would also add that Cryptolepis is not easy to grow, right? And not easy to cultivate. It's very particular about its environment, tends to grow in tropical environments, and it's very particular about moisture levels and light levels and so forth. So it's, I sometimes have concerns too about people overusing Cryptolepis and putting too much pressure on that plant because cultivation is really difficult. And so it doesn't necessarily lend itself to being a plant for really widespread use, whereas the Artemisias can sustain the demand. So from an ecological perspective, there's a massive advantage there.
Outstanding. Great answers across the board. Other and wonderful question. Other questions?
A question for Samuel, please. From
Yep.
a grower perspective. Samuel?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Artemisia afra and Artemisia annua, they're really weeds. They grow prolifically. But I was noticing your stem, your growing conditions there. Are you adding any kind of supplements in terms of the soil conditions that you have? Even in a lot of the La Maison d'Artemisia nurseries, they use their homegrown mulching and that kind of thing. I'm using a certain kind of a 20-20-20 pellet that helps intensify because I'm growing in pots. So I'm just curious if you have a means to maybe supplement the soil during time.
Well, I believe there's a lot of work, especially with regards to people who grow the plants. I particularly do not grow the plant myself, but from studies already shown with the growth of Artemisia in Nigeria, it grows very well down south than the north. Some of the work I showed you happened in the north. Like I told you, the north is like more like a desert area, and I'm not sure why Artemisia annua is not performing very well there. But it performs very well like in the southern part of Nigeria. And I believe that a lot of work is currently ongoing with trying to see if they can, supplement the soil, allowing for the plants to thrive well. And since it's like a weed per se, I think it should be able to do good.
So the northern part where it's a desert is probably the factor that's hindering the most is it just needs a lot more water, and that's really difficult to get to it.
Right. But it's kind of tricky because when the herbalist was speaking, she talked about how the plant doesn't necessarily require a lot of water. So I'm not exactly sure. There's no information currently as to why it doesn't perform so well in the north, but I'm going to like attribute the lack of water or the climatic condition to, its proper growth in northern Nigeria. Yeah.
So in Massachusetts, when I'm starting them out in the garden, because I grow them in the field every year, I
Yeah.
have to add water for the first month and a half. If we don't get rain, I have to water. Once it gets tall enough it can shade itself,
Yeah.
then I don't usually have to water very much.
Yeah, our conditions in the tropics are a little different. We get a lot of water, and we can't
Yeah.
get. But these plants seem to adapt. It takes about 3 years, but these plants have started to adapt.
Yeah. Well, I believe if it's doing so great in East Africa, from where a lot of the seeds are gotten from, it should also do well in Nigeria.
Awesome. Other
I guess
questions?
the advantage is that this plant is so receptive to its environment that it's really quite interesting that it can adapt to very different climatic conditions.
Yes.
One thing, I saw one of the chats, they were talking about having a harvest in the fall. We harvest all year long because our climate conditions allow us to do that.
Right.
But annua has a photoperiod sensitivity, so we have to supplement lighting during the months that we don't get over 12 and a half hours of sun. We don't do that, it goes into bud right away. I've had clones go into bud.
Yeah. And that's interesting because we have a lot of sun in Nigeria, right? So it's mostly hot or oil.
You need to look at your photoperiod cycle to make sure of the numbers of hours that you have the sun.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
there are so many different cultivars of Artemisia annua, and they all have different photoperiod sensitivities. That's part of the problem and why you want to stick to a clonal one, and preferably one that works well in your region that you could grow year round. So if you think about it, if you're near the equator, you don't get much more than a 12-hour day, and so you have to have the right cultivar that will grow in an equatorial band around the planet, because otherwise you will just get really early flowering. And you want to try to clonally propagate in order to maintain your phytochemical consistency. If you don't do that, you will get lots of variability. As I say, we don't let our plants have sex, which is flowering.
I feel like that needs to be like a logo over your greenhouse, James. This is great. Other questions, comments? The discussion's great too. Don't let me interrupt too, but just want to make sure everyone's questions are answered. Okay. Well, do any of the
Can I
speakers
just-
have any last minute stuff? Yeah, go ahead.
I gotta say, I would be happy to show people how consistent these plants look if they'd like to see that, because I have one or two slides that just could show them that.
Yeah, please. Yes,
Oh,
we have the time.
See
That would be
that?
great.
All right. Am I still sharing? Can I
You're
still
not
share?
sharing.
Okay, so you have to put me to share again.
Are you, I don't, are you able to press, there should be like a green button on the bottom
Yeah,
there.
I can, yeah. Okay, I see it. All right,
Okay, cool.
good. All right. So what I'm showing everybody here, and I'll do the presentation mode here so it's easier to see. Come on. Yeah. So I'm showing everybody here, move this all the way, whoops, backwards, back up. I'm just trying to move it out of the way. This little side panel, it's like, there we go. Okay, minimized it. Okay, so here, these are 9 years of the field cultivation I've done. That's artemisinin. And this is like a fingerprint of the terpenoids. We moved it to Florida. It's the same clone. Their cloning produces, this is 5 of the commercially available crops now that have been produced in Florida. And that's 5, 6, crops along. So it shows you that from the terpenoid standpoint, it's been very consistent. Where it gets interesting is this is Massachusetts. These are flavonoids and other kinds of, fluorescent compounds that are small molecules. In Massachusetts, highly consistent. Look what happened to it in Florida. So this is now pretty consistent, but it changed. And it's about 3 times, it's 2.5 times more flavonoids than in Massachusetts. And we attribute that to the more intense sun down there, because flavonoids act as a sunscreen on plants. But I wanted you to see that you can get consistency in phytochemical compounds if you do clonal propagation. And so this plant never goes to seed, and it never, this is not kept in tissue culture for this purposes. We just do rooted cuttings, and that's how we propagate. And that's how James propagates in Florida. So I just wanted to show that to everyone.
That's fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. Dr. Peterson, is there any tradition that you know about like the stress of the environment and when to harvest in Western herbal medicine around that? I mean, just seeing the difference of those compounds. Any
Generally, in general, we, across all medicinal plant species, we prefer, we go after, and a lot of growers actually actively stress plants in various ways because it produces more of the constituents that lend, usually it's the constituents that are there to protect the plant in some way that have a medicinal effect on human beings as well. And so if we grow plants in just a, happy, easygoing environment, we get less production of some of those key medicinal constituents. Whereas when plants are stressed, and like I said, in many ways, it can be extra sun, and the stress of that, and then the plants produce more flavonoids, for example, or sometimes wind stress and drought stress. And so in general, the principle is we stress plants. We don't necessarily want the beautiful, you would put it, whatever, you would grow it for the floral industry type of plants. Sometimes we want them a little bit more gnarly looking plants that have um, weathered the environment because they're stronger. They're stronger. The plants have developed their immune responses, and that's what we want to affect our immune response and other, antioxidant capacity and all of those things.
Fascinating. Very cool. Any other last minute comments or slides from presenters or questions from the audience?
So I do actually have a question with Artemisia on pulsing for long-term use. So think like a chronic Lyme protocol. Continuous dosing versus pulsing. Because Artemisia, of all the herbs out there that are kind of in the spectrum of things you would use, Artemisia is the one that I think of as needing to be pulsed. But I'm just curious but I have also seen naturopaths just put people on Artemisia and keep them on it for years. And so I'm just kind of curious about, the state of the discourse on that.
I can speak to that maybe just a little bit. From what I know, the origin of wanting to pulse the medicine, there's a couple things. Some of it is just traditional use, that it was traditionally used, oftentimes for a particular situation that was expected to be or considered to be more transient, whether it was an infectious disease or like that summer heat in an excess yang with fluid imbalance. And some of the traditional use didn't reflect, like utilizing it for osteoarthritis, long-term, or metabolic conditions. The other thing that comes into play in the use of Artemisia annua is that it has been, there's been some research into its effect on CYP enzymes and accelerating their function, essentially being an inducer of certain CYP pathways. These are detoxification enzymes in the liver, and that induction is induced over a period of maybe days to weeks, and so that the more you induce it, that it actually clears itself faster. This is the theory. I don't know that this has actually really been sussed out in pharmacologic studies, but the idea with pulsing it would be to not allow that CYP induction to ramp up as high, right? To dose it and then give it a break, and then dose it and give it a break. So like I said, some of that is just theory, and it has played into the way that people dose Artemisia annua. And then some of it is that we also see people who have dosed it consistently for very long periods of time, very safely and efficaciously. So I think we're a little bit in limbo between, what we have formally studied, what has been observed, what is theorized, what is traditional wisdom. So there's a little bit more to figure out in that. And also, sometimes if we have induction and it clears itself faster, how long do we need it to be active each dose? Sometimes things are effective even when they have a temporary action, that there are secondary and tertiary effects that spin off of that action, and we don't need the herb or a medication of any kind to be at a sustained state in the serum to provide a long-term benefit. So I would say that in my mind, I just pour all of those things together and say there's a possibility that it can be used consistently, and maybe the pulse dosing actually isn't necessary.
I can I can talk to that a little bit too, because we've actually done work on looking at the P450s that are affected by Artemisia. And I can send you the publication later if you like. There's also a clinical trial that was done in Korea that I can talk about. So we observed that Artemisia afra and annua inhibit the activity, they inhibit the translation, and also the transcription of genes in the liver of the 2B6 and 3A4 P450s. So if anybody's interested, I can send them that because it's actually very interesting how that worked. And so that's done in liver cells, hepatocytes. Now, when you talk about long-term dosing, there's a very interesting clinical study that was done on patients who had fatty liver disease, and they were dosed daily for 2 months with Artemisia, and their liver enzymes improved, and actually their disease was remediated. And so that was another example of long-term treatment where it was highly effective. So that was, their ALT and AST and ALT. So there is both a lot of evidence that indicates that you can do long-term treatment. Pulsing was I know is usually used because there is the concern on the P450s, and that's one of the reasons why we did some of that study, because we wanted to know what was the longer term or short-term and long-term effects. So we did it on hepatocytes, which is a short-term study because, it's cells in culture. But we studied the mechanism of what happens. And so we understand that. Our whole goal was to explain why artemisinin was so bioavailable, because artemisinin does induce some of those P450s. But the plant inhibits a lot of different regulatory stages there. And then that played out in the clinic with those patients. So I think that might help clarify that. I'm willing to send that information if anybody's interested. I have the paper on the clinical trial as well as the paper we did.
I would love to see both of those. How do I get you my information for you to send it to me? Do you just want my email in the chat, or?
You know what, Pam, sorry, Dr. Weathers, if you want to send me that link, because I'm going to send out a link to everyone that registered for the video, and I could just send a citation to the paper as well for everyone too, if that's all right. That's fascinating work. And, interestingly, from the research side of things, which is where I live, for James's study, the clinical trial we're doing, these are the debates we had with the IRB, the Internal Review Board, trying to figure out, who would be allowed in the trial and who not. And they were worried about the effects on the liver, and there's evidence it improves the liver and it improves P450s or inhibits them. And so ended up if they're on any meds that even whisper at a P450, we had to have pretty strict inclusion criteria. But yeah, all this plays out both in clinic and in research and the mechanics of it all. So I find it all absolutely fascinating. Great question. Thank you. I think any last minute comments or questions before we call it? This has just been outstanding.
Josh, I want to say,
Please.
can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone and thank you for allowing me to be part of your world. I live in a different world, and that of social services and social justice. So this is very new to me, and it was an incredibly edifying experience. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. And I think hearing your perspective really set the stage for the entire seminar. So I think that was just wonderful. Thank you again for being here with us. And again, I'm the Yiddish word is kvelling. Like you're just so proud. I'm so proud of this seminar and what it turned into. And it might be a model for how we do this moving forward, really tapping into all of our. I was slapping my forehead like, why did we not have the dean of traditional Chinese medicine on here? I don't know what I was thinking to not invite him, but we have this very deep experience within our community across the board, and I think this was just wonderful. So thank you all so much for your attendance, incredible presentations by the presenters, and it is all being recorded. We'll put it up on the website, and for the folks that registered and weren't able to listen, we'll get the recording out. So thank you again so much. And next month, we're having another presentation on ketogenic diets for traumatic brain injury recovery as part of this series. So lots of neat stuff. All right. Thank you, everybody, and take care. Bye-bye.